Now that we're all experts in primary documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, I think it's appropriate to talk about the history of voting rights throughout the course of our nation. Okay? So starting from the beginning, we know the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal, yet we still had slavery in the South for over another 100 years. And also, women couldn't vote, and also poor men couldn't vote. Free blacks, free African Americans couldn't vote. So really, voting rights up until the Civil War, so we've got the Declaration down to the Civil War in 1865, the only people that could vote, I'm going to put them up here, were your rich, white, property-owning males. Okay? And maybe if they weren't rich but they owned some property, they could vote too. Okay? So really, after the Declaration of Independence, the only people that could vote were rich, white, or property-owning males. Now, something happened in the mid-1800s, just before the Civil War, where you no longer had to be rich, and you no longer had to be a property-owning male, but you had to be I should have written that up there to begin with, a male. So after 1840, all you had to be was white and male in order to vote. Okay? Now we're going to go through some things and see how that developed. And really we're going to see that voting was kind of the last thing to develop throughout the course of our nation when we talk about those individual rights. So let's get to it. Let's get out our textbooks. So here we are on page 336 of our textbooks, and it says, New Voters. President Andrew Jackson promised equal protection and equal benefits for all Americans, at least for all white American men. During his first term, a spirit of equality spread through American politics. In the nation's early years, most states had limited suffrage, or the right to vote. Suffrage means voting, for men who owned property or paid taxes. By 1815, many states had loosened or would soon loosen the property requirements for voting. In the 1820s, democracy expanded as people who had not been allowed to vote voted for the first time. Between 1824 and 1828, the percentage of white males voting in presidential elections increased from about 27% to about 58%. For the first time, white male sharecroppers, factory workers, and many others were brought into the political process. So between 1824 and 1828, your working poor, your factory workers, your sharecroppers finally were able to vote. They didn't have to be rich. They didn't have to be property owning, but they did have to be white and they did have to be male. The expansion of suffrage continued, and in 1840 more than 80% of white males voted in the presidential election. However, women still could not vote, and African Americans and Native Americans had few rights of any kind. Another development in the broadening of democracy involved presidential electors. By 1828, 22 of the 24 states changed their constitutions to allow people, rather than state legislatures, to choose the presidential electors. So now we kind of have our electoral college system where people vote for a candidate and it's a winner-take-all. They get all of those electoral votes for that state. The 14th Amendment. Now, if you recall from some of those presentations over the Bill of Rights, the 14th Amendment is the Equal Protection Amendment. It means that it doesn't matter if you're black, white, gay, straight, purple, brown, yellow, blue, green, or from Mars. If you're an American citizen, you are to receive the same protection, the same rights as everyone else. At least that's how it is interpreted today. So let's start. The 14th Amendment. Congress wanted to ensure that African Americans would not lose the rights that the Civil Rights Act granted. We're talking about the Civil Rights Act that ended slavery in 1866. Figuring it might be challenged and overturned in court, Congress in June 1866 passed a new amendment to the Constitution. The 14th Amendment granted full citizenship to all individuals born in the United States. Because most African Americans in the United States had been born there, they became full citizens. The amendment also stated that no state could take away a citizen's life, liberty, and property without due process of law, and that every citizen was entitled to equal protection of the laws. States that prevented any adult male citizen from voting could lose part of their representation in Congress. So the 14th Amendment said that everyone was equal, but remember, women still couldn't vote. So after the 14th Amendment saying that everybody is equal except for women, now we have a vote or an amendment guaranteeing everybody that's male the right to vote. The 15th Amendment. After the election, Republicans developed their last major piece of Reconstruction legislation. In February 1869, Congress passed the 15th Amendment. It prohibited the state and federal governments from denying the right to vote to any male citizen because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. African American men won the right to vote when the 15th Amendment was ratified and became law in February 1870. Republicans thought that the power of the ballot would enable African Americans to protect themselves. That belief, it turned out, was too optimistic, and we'll deal with that in a little bit. So when did women receive the right to vote? Let's go on, and we'll see how really women's right to vote and voting rights in our nation developed last over really a lot of other important things. So believe it or not, it wasn't until the 19th Amendment that was passed or ratified, approved in 1920, that women received the right to vote. Amendment 19. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by state on an account of sex. Congress shall have power to appropriate legislation to enforce the provisions of this article. So really, voting rights were granted very, very late. Almost 150 years after the founding of our country, not everyone had voting rights yet. So after the Declaration of Independence, your rich, white, landowning males had access at the ballot box, and up until 1840, your poor, indigent males couldn't vote. Right around 1840, though, your American males that were poor had the right to vote, and then in 1870, after the abolition of slavery with the 13th Amendment, equal protection from the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment in 1870 granted African American males the right to vote, and it wasn't until almost 50 years later in 1919, 1920, that women received the right to vote. Kind of astonishing when you think all the way back in 1776 that all men were created equal and all men meant everyone.